Hello everyone, and welcome back to RealFear Files. Tonight, I'm bringing you 9 chilling true stories from Black Friday across the United States. Moments when the chaos of holiday shopping turned far darker than anyone expected. Behind the flashing sales signs and crowded aisles, there are incidents most stores would rather you never hear about. Events that left lasting scars on the people who lived through them. These accounts have been carefully researched and adapted from real experiences, shared by shoppers, employees, and eyewitnesses who will never forget what they saw. To protect the privacy and safety of those involved, certain names and identifying details have been changed. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to RealFear Files for daily true horror stories that will keep you up at night. Comment below where you're watching from and hit that notification bell, so you never miss when the darkness creeps into your feed once again. Story 1. I'd been punching the clock for roughly a year and a half at this gig. Not enough time to turn totally cynical, but definitely long enough to kick the jitters before the big sales. The joint was a regional chain we called Gear Grid. Black Friday at Gear Grid? Always a total shocker. We'd crack the doors at 4 in the a.m., and even though we weren't a mega retailer, the deals still dragged in a tidal wave of folks. Those cheesy off-brand scooters that sat gathering dust all year? Poof. Gone in the first 60 minutes. This year, though, the air felt thick, creepy, before the place even opened. We were seriously short-handed. The late-shift security guard bailed, claiming a stomach bug. So, it was just old Chester out front, a quiet dude in his 60s who rarely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. Sweet enough, but about as menacing as a kitten. Management just shrugged it off. They always did. Around 3:30, I was setting up the doorbuster displays, a mess of flat-screen TVs with sale stickers slapped on them crookedly, a mountain of cheapo tablets, and a couple of truly bizarre clearance items like UV phone cleaners and janky fitness bands. I tried to focus on the setup, but I kept sneaking glances out the main window. The queue had started hours ago. By now, it snaked past the nail joint and wrapped around the block toward the drugstore. That wasn't the weirdest part. It was how silent they were. No yapping, no fidgeting, no friendly banter. Just endless lines of people standing stone still, their faces locked onto the glass like they were waiting for something specific, something dark that we hadn't even advertised. The clock hit 4 sharp. Chester slowly turned the lock. The throng poured in like a silent flood. No shoving, no screaming, just this utterly unsettling, quiet slide. They instantly scattered in every direction, like they had practiced a macabre dance. For the first 10 minutes, it was almost normal. People snagged their stuff fast, but still no yelling, no brawls, just that eerie, dead silence. Then, someone clipped a floor lamp over by the smart tech section. The sound of metal clattering on the tile floor shattered whatever spell was holding everything together. In an instant, the whole scene twisted. Someone ripped a display watch right off its stand, yanking the entire security cable out with it. A guy in a puffy ski jacket shoved 2 internet routers into a trolley that was definitely baby-free. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was hissing static. I flipped channels, jiggled the antenna wire. Nothing. I turned toward the back of the store, specifically the camera aisle. That's where we'd stashed the high-value gear this year. There should have been a feeding frenzy. But I noticed something freaky. The lights in the rear drooped. They didn't flicker. They just dimmed by a full level. It wasn't the entire store, just the back third. I picked my way toward it, stepping over a broken plastic storage bin. The closer I got, the more off-kilter it felt. There was hardly any movement back there. The shelves were still fully loaded, Not a single item had been touched. I turned down the aisle and froze. There was a girl crouched near the middle, facing a bottom shelf. Her long black hair curtained her face. Her hands were planted flat on the floor, palms down. Her knees were tucked underneath her perfectly, like she was balancing on an invisible line. At first, I thought she was just super focused. Maybe she dropped a contact lens. I asked if she needed a hand. She didn't respond, didn't even shiver. I walked a little closer and lightly touched her shoulder. Her body shifted, not like a jump or a flinch, but like I'd given a push to a dummy. Her torso leaned slightly sideways, as if there was no muscle tension at all, just a change in dead weight. Then her head suddenly slumped forward, not twisted, just collapsed like something snapped inside. I took a fast step back. My foot bumped into something hard. I spun around. A man was standing right behind me, too close. He was wearing one of our staff sweatshirts, dark navy, the kind we only handed out after the 90-day mark. But I knew every single person on the clock that night. This guy was a total stranger. Before I could even choke out a word, he ghosted past me and knelt next to the girl. He placed one hand flat on her back and just held it there, motionless. No talking, no movement. I never saw his face. I backed away and made a beeline for the staff break room. I don't know what I was thinking. I just needed to bail out of that aisle, away from that unspeakable thing. The corridor leading to the break room was way darker than I remembered, but I didn't slow down. When I finally got inside, I slammed the door shut behind me, completely by accident. My hands were shaking like crazy. I pressed my palms flat on the counter and tried to breathe in slow, ragged gulps. The room was vacant. The wall clock read 4:37. The second hand ticked right into place, but then just stalled. It kept clicking in a tight little loop. I went to leave, but the door handle barely turned. The door was stuck. I shoved it again, then gave it a light kick. Nothing. Then I heard it. A slow, grinding roll right outside, like plastic wheels on the tile floor. My stomach just sank. The janitorial crew didn't show up until closing. There shouldn't have been a mop bucket out there, but that's exactly what it sounded like. I hunched down and peeped through the little gap beneath the door. Sure enough, a yellow utility bucket slowly trundled past, but there were no feet, no shadow, just the bucket itself. It kept moving steadily, and behind it came this soft, wet, dragging noise, something cloth-like being pulled across the floor. I yanked my hand off the door, holding my breath. The noise faded. A few seconds later, the clock ticked forward a full minute, then froze up again. I pulled out my cell phone, trying to text my manager. The message just spun, then failed. I tried to call. 0 bars, not even a little bit. I checked the cabinets out of a twitchy habit and found a pair of men's worn, flat shoes I'd never seen before. One of the laces was damp. At 5:03, the door clicked open on its own. No sudden noise, just a quiet, mechanical snick. I waited, listening. Silence. Then I slowly opened it. The hallway was empty. No bucket, no strange trail. The lights were still dimmed. I walked back onto the main floor. No customers, no carts, no discarded product boxes. Nothing. The store looked exactly the way it had before opening. Fully stocked, gleaming clean, quiet as a tomb. Even the welcome chime was dead. I stood there for what felt like too long. Then the receipt printer at Register 3 chirped. One slip spat out. I walked over. My name was on it. Not my employee number, not the register ID. My actual first name, centered in black ink, right beneath a timestamp. I unplugged the printer. It printed again. I bolted. Didn't clock out. Didn't look for Chester. I didn't see him by the exit. He wasn't there. The whole strip mall was completely pitch black. Every store window, every sign. No lights on in the pharmacy. No buzzing neon from the smoke shop. Nothing. I drove home in total silence. I didn't sleep a wink. On Monday, the regional manager sent an email asking why I hadn't filed my closing reports. I just told him I took off early, and now I live 2 counties away. Story 2. I'd been punching the clock for roughly a year and a half at this gig, clocking hours, absorbing the grind. It was just enough time to stop being a nervous wreck and to kick the jitters that usually accompany a big sales push. Yet not enough time to turn totally cynical about the entire retail ecosystem. The joint was a regional electronics chain we called Gear Grid, a place that promised futuristic tech but mostly sold markdown cables and cheap streaming sticks. Black Friday at Gear Grid? Always a total shocker. A yearly descent into absolute retail pandemonium. We were scheduled to crack the doors at 4 in the a.m. Despite the fact we weren't a mega retailer, we were no big box titan. The deals were steep enough to regularly drag in a tidal wave of folks. Those cheesy off-brand electric scooters and drone toys that sat gathering dust all year? They would literally vanish. Poof, gone in the first 60 minutes. Carted away by strangely desperate people. This year, though, the air felt thick, heavy, and creepy. Well before the place even officially opened for business. We were seriously short-handed. The late-shift security guard, a guy named Rick who never missed a day, bailed at the last minute, claiming a sudden, debilitating stomach bug. So, that left us with just old Chester out front, a quiet, soft-spoken dude in his 60s who rarely glanced up from his daily crossword puzzle. Chester was sweet enough, but about as menacing as a house cat. Management just shrugged it off, of course. They always did. They were more worried about the cash flow than the security flow. Around 3:30, I was elbow-deep in the process of setting up the core doorbuster displays, a chaotic mess of off-brand flat-screen TVs with sales stickers slapped on them crookedly, a precarious mountain of cheapo tablets, and a couple of truly bizarre clearance items like UV phone cleaners and janky fitness bands from some defunct startup. I tried to focus on the proper mandated layout, but my gaze kept sneaking glances out the main window. The queue had started hours ago. By now, it didn't just reach the parking lot border. It snaked past the nail joint next door and wrapped completely around the block toward the drugstore. That wasn't the weirdest part, though, because we expected the crowd. It was how silent they were. There was no usual pre-sale yapping, no restless fidgeting, no friendly banter or complaining about the cold. Just endless, rigid lines of people standing stone still, their faces locked onto the glass like they were waiting for something specific, something dark, something deeply unsettling that we hadn't even remotely advertised. They looked like statues waiting for a sculptor to give them permission to move. The clock hit 4 sharp. Chester, moving with painful slowness, finally turned the heavy lock. The throng poured in like a single silent flood. There was no frantic shoving, no aggressive screaming, just this utterly unsettling, quiet slide of humanity. They instantly scattered in every direction, moving with such eerie precision it was like they had practiced a macabre dance specifically for the store layout. For the first 10 minutes, the chaos was almost deceptive. People expertly navigated the aisles and snagged their items fast, but still, no yelling, no violent brawls, just that awful, pervasive, dead silence. Then, near the smart tech section, someone clipped a floor lamp. The distinct, loud sound of metal clattering and skidding on the tile floor shattered whatever spell was holding everything together in that weird, frozen calm. In an instant, the whole scene twisted and turned vile. Someone ripped a smart display watch right off its stand, yanking the entire security cable out of the wall with a nasty, tearing sound. Across the way, a massive guy in a puffy ski jacket shoved 2 expensive internet routers into a shopping trolley that was conspicuously baby-free. I tried to radio for help, any employee, management, anyone, but all I got was a horrifying, high-pitched hissing static. I flipped channels, jiggled the antenna wire. Nothing but white noise. I turned and looked toward the back of the store, specifically the camera aisle. That's where we'd stashed the high-value gear this year, the expensive, desirable stuff. There absolutely should have been a feeding frenzy back there, but I noticed something truly freaky. The lights in the rear of the building drooped. They didn't even flicker. They just dimmed by a full, sudden level. It wasn't the entire store. It was just the back third that had been swallowed by the gloom. I picked my way toward it, stepping over a broken plastic storage bin. The closer I got, the more off-kilter it felt, the cold air hitting my skin. There was hardly any movement back there. The shelves were still fully loaded. Not a single item had been touched. I turned down the aisle and froze. The hair stood up on my neck. There was a girl crouched near the middle of the aisle, facing a bottom shelf. Her long black hair curtained her face, obscuring everything. Her hands were planted flat on the floor, palms down. Her knees were tucked underneath her perfectly, like she was balancing on an invisible line drawn on the floor. At first, my brain tried to rationalize. She's super focused. Maybe she dropped a contact lens. I asked if she needed a hand. She didn't respond, didn't even shiver or flinch. I walked a little closer and lightly touched her shoulder. Her body shifted, not like a jump or a reflexive flinch, but like I'd given a push to a mannequin filled with sand. Her torso leaned slightly sideways, as if there was no muscle tension at all, just a change in dead weight. Then her head suddenly slumped forward, not twisted, just collapsed like something snapped inside her neck. I took a fast, clumsy step back. My foot bumped into something hard behind me. I spun around. A man was standing right behind me, too close for comfort. He was wearing one of our staff sweatshirts, dark navy, the kind we only handed out after the official 90-day mark. But I knew every single person on the clock that night. This guy was a total, unnerving stranger. Before I could even choke out a word, he ghosted past me and simply knelt next to the girl. He placed one hand flat on her back and just held it there, motionless. No talking, no movement. I never saw his face. I backed away and made a beeline for the staff break room. I didn't know what I was doing. I just needed to bail out of that aisle, away from that unspeakable thing and the crushing darkness. The corridor leading to the break room was way darker and longer than I remembered, the shadows reaching out like skeletal hands, but I didn't dare slow down. When I finally got inside, I slammed the metal door shut behind me, the loud noise echoing in the sudden quiet. My hands were shaking like crazy, my palms slick with cold sweat. I pressed them flat on the counter and tried to suck in slow, ragged gulps of air. The room was vacant, thankfully. The wall clock above the unused toaster oven read 4:37. The second hand ticked right into place, made a final clicking sound, but then just stalled. It kept making that tiny clicking noise in a tight, never-ending loop, but the hand never moved forward. I went to leave, but the heavy door handle barely turned. The door was solidly stuck. I shoved it again, then gave it a light kick. Nothing. It was sealed tight. Then I heard it. A slow, rhythmic, grinding roll right outside the break room. It sounded distinctly like plastic wheels turning on the tile floor. My stomach just sank like a stone. The janitorial crew didn't show up until closing time, hours from now. There shouldn't have been a mop bucket out there, but that's exactly what it sounded like. I hunched down low and peered through the little gap beneath the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Sure enough, a yellow utility bucket slowly trundled past, moving at a steady, unnerving speed. But there were no feet, no shadow above it, no source of locomotion, just the bucket itself, moving with unnatural purpose. It kept moving steadily, and behind it came this soft, wet, dragging noise, something cloth-like, or perhaps something worse, being pulled across the floor with a low sss, sss, sss. I snatched my hand off the door, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The strange dragging noise faded down the hall. A few seconds later, the clock made a sudden loud clack and ticked forward a full minute, landing squarely on 4:38. Then froze up again in that perpetual clicking stutter. I pulled out my cell phone, my thumb frantically trying to text my manager. The message just spun in an endless loading circle, then failed. I tried to call. The screen showed 0 bars, not low signal, but absolute flatline 0. I checked the cabinets out of a twitchy, meaningless habit and found a pair of men's worn, flat work shoes tucked away. Shoes I'd never seen before. One of the laces was conspicuously damp. At 5:03, the door suddenly unlocked on its own. No sudden slam, no dramatic sound, just a quiet, decisive, mechanical snick. I waited, listened. Silence. Then I slowly, carefully opened it. The hallway was absolutely empty. No yellow bucket, no trail, no sign of the dragging. The lights were still dimmed and oppressive. I walked back onto the main floor. No customers, no abandoned shopping carts, no discarded product boxes, no torn packaging, nothing. The entire store looked exactly the way it had before opening. Fully stocked, gleaming clean, every product returned to its shelf, quiet as a stone-cold tomb. Even the welcome chime by the entrance was dead silent. I stood there, paralyzed for what felt like too long. Then the receipt printer at Register 3 chirped. A single thin slip of paper spat out. I walked over, my movements slow and deliberate. My name was printed on it, not my employee number, not the register ID, my actual first name, centered in thick black ink, right beneath a very specific, current timestamp. I grabbed the cord and violently unplugged the printer from the wall. It printed again. I bolted. I didn't clock out. I didn't waste a second looking for Chester. I didn't see him by the main exit. He wasn't there. The whole strip mall was completely pitch black. Every store window, every neon sign. No lights on in the pharmacy. No buzzing neon from the smoke shop. Nothing but darkness. I drove home in total silence, pushing the speed limit, praying the rearview mirror didn't show anything following me. I didn't sleep a wink that night. On Monday, the regional manager sent an email asking why I hadn't filed my closing reports or returned my staff radio. I just told him I took off early and explained nothing else. I packed my belongings that week, found a new apartment, and now I live 2 counties away from the entire awful memory. Story 3. Black Friday at the Westlake Landing Outlet Mall was already completely off the rails by the time I clocked in at 3:30 in the unholy morning. Our shoe store, Soul Surge, just one of those mid-tier chains crammed with endless, towering shelves of cardboard boxes and those awful, sickly flickering fluorescent lights, was located near the south end. We were awkwardly tucked between a heavily scented candle place and a dismal vitamin shop that never seemed to host more than 2 customers at once. Nothing special about the location, but we absolutely relied on the foot traffic, especially on days that descended into madness like this one. I was the assistant manager back then, a title that mostly meant I was the poor soul who had to be the opener, the one who stayed behind when someone inevitably didn't show up, and the one who always got blamed when the clearance section ended up looking like a retail war zone. I'd been working this gig long enough to stop expecting these big sales to ever go smoothly. But that year, corporate went hard. They plastered up signs promising 30% off absolutely everything and attempting buy one get one on all clearance items. They made it crystal clear to us that they expected nothing less than record, soul-crushing numbers, and they got them, in spades. We were already hopelessly behind schedule before I even got the keys to unlock the security gate. Customers were camped outside, huddled together, some wrapped tightly in blankets, others just bouncing aggressively on their heels like caged animals who couldn't wait to shove past someone to get inside. By 4:50 a.m., the line stretched halfway down the concrete corridor, disappearing into the cold, pre-dawn gloom. We unlocked the doors at 5 o'clock on the dot. They flooded in like a single aggressive wave, like they were racing us to reach the shelves. For the first few hours, my brain went into pure muscle memory mode. I ran back, grabbed a size 8. I ran back up and had to ring up 6 pairs of boots in a single frenzied transaction. I restocked when there was only a sliver of space left on the shelves. I managed a strained professional smile even when some frantic customer was screaming that we were somehow inexplicably out of wide-width men's hiking boots. It was that kind of hellish morning. I don't even remember taking a single deep breath until just before 8 a.m. It was maybe 8:15 when I finally managed to duck behind the counter for a quick sip of my coffee, which had long since turned into icy, flavorless sludge. I leaned heavily against the back cabinet, watching the crowd move around the store floor like a swarm of frantic, single-minded ants. And that's when I saw him. The kid looked about 7 years old, maybe younger. He was small, standing unnervingly off to the side near the heavy snow boots display, not doing anything remotely normal. He wasn't looking at shoes. He wasn't touching anything. Just standing stone still, watching the moving torrent of people. There was absolutely no adult nearby, no one even glancing his way. He wore no coat, just a thin, striped, long-sleeve shirt and faded pajama bottoms. It was notable because it had snowed the night before. People were bundled up in heavy jackets and still complaining about the sharp cold in the entryway. But this kid didn't even have socks on. His ankles were completely bare against the cold tile. At first, I figured he'd simply gotten separated from a parent who was distracted by a deal. So, I waited a second, scanning the chaotic crowd, fully expecting someone to notice him, to panic, or to call out his name. Nothing. I walked over, my movements cautious, and crouched a little to try and meet his eye level. "Hey, buddy, are you here with someone?" He didn't respond, didn't move an inch. He just looked at me, flatly. Not confused, not scared, just utterly, chillingly blank. And then he walked away. Not in a hurry, not running to find someone, but just turned and headed deeper into the store, weaving between the high shelves like he'd memorized the layout. There was something profoundly off about the way he moved, like the physical space around him didn't apply the same way it did to the rest of the frantic shoppers. I know that sounds dramatic and frankly insane, but that's precisely what it felt like. He didn't dodge or pause when people rushed directly in front of him. He just slipped around them, or through them, or somehow navigated the space in between. I blinked, and he was gone. Like completely gone. I went back to the counter and asked Lena, one of our newer hires, if she saw who he came in with. She looked confused and said she hadn't seen him at all. I pointed to where he'd gone, but that spot was already packed solid with customers again. "He probably just wandered out," Lena murmured, already ringing up the next impatient person. We brushed it off, but the cold feeling remained. Things picked up again instantly. Rush after rush of aggressive shoppers. People were literally throwing shoeboxes at the counter, completely spent. There were kids sitting on the dirty floor, struggling to zip up boots that clearly didn't fit them. I didn't think about the boy again until around noon. I was in the back storage room, which was a cavern of dread, pulling a few new boxes that hadn't been unpacked yet. It was a complete mess in there. Stacks of cardboard, crumpled packing slips, and random single shoes with no mates scattered everywhere. I was halfway through stacking a pile of high-top sneaker boxes when I turned around. He was there again. The exact same kid, standing next to the emergency exit door, still barefoot, still not saying a single word. He was just staring intensely at the red push bar on the door, like he was trying to remember a crucial, long-forgotten sequence. My whole body tensed up, a primal knot of fear and confusion. "Hey!" I said, much louder this time, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Do you need help? Are you okay?" He didn't react at first. Then, slowly, he looked up at me and actually smiled. It was small, incredibly quick, but it made every single hair on my arm stand on end. It was not a happy, childish smile. It was a profoundly knowing one. The kind people give when they are watching something horrific unfold exactly how they expected it to. Then the alarm shrieked. That blaring, high-pitched emergency exit alarm that you literally cannot ignore tore through the silence. The adjacent red strobe lights started flashing and cycling, and I flinched so hard I dropped the stack of boxes I was holding. The door never opened. It was still solidly sealed shut, but the alarm kept wailing, a sound of absolute panic. Lena came running into the storage room, her eyes wide with fear, immediately assuming some shoplifter had tried to sneak out with a bag of clearance heels. I pointed toward the exit door, already backing away from the spot, but of course, no one was there. The kid had vanished again. Lena looked at me like I was completely losing my mind. I probably looked exactly that way too. We called mall security. They eventually came down to take a quick look. They made a note of it, muttered about a possible wiring fault, said they'd review the hallway footage, and told us they'd let us know if they saw anything. That was it. No follow-up. By 4 p.m., we were right in the middle of the second big sales push of the day. People who had gone home to nap had returned, ready to finish cleaning us out. We were short-staffed by then. 2 people had bailed early due to the chaos, and both front registers started freezing and glitching. First one, then the other. Screens locked up, the card readers were dead, and customers were groaning in loud frustration. One guy threw his shoebox down onto the counter and loudly stomped out. While I was elbow-deep in the terrifying guts of the POS system, trying to force a reboot, Lena leaned over and whispered, her voice thin with fright. "He's back." I followed her eyes to the front. There he was, standing just outside the glass door front. Same clothes, same dead-still posture. Only this time, he was slowly, rhythmically moving his lips over and over again. But no sound came out. Just that same blank, vacant expression, like he was reciting a demonic mantra. Then he raised his hand, pointing right at me. It wasn't dramatic or frantic. He didn't make a face. He just lifted his bare arm and held his finger out, perfectly still, as if he was singling me out of the roaring crowd and marking me. And I swear I felt it, like a sudden, suffocating pressure deep in my chest, as if I'd been called out and marked by something utterly malignant. I dropped the hand scanner and moved toward the glass window. A woman pushing a huge stroller walked right between us. When she finally passed, he was gone again. I burst out of the store and looked desperately in both directions. The corridor was full, but there was no trace of him. I tried calling mall security again. No answer. I didn't know what else I could possibly do. So I went back in and kept working, the cold mark still on my chest. It wasn't until closing that I found the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. The receipt. I was emptying the large bins beneath the registers, mostly paper scraps and discarded gift card sleeves. But under the third, malfunctioning register, I found one receipt, cleanly folded into a perfect square. Not torn, not crumpled, just sitting there, like someone had tucked it in on purpose. It was from our store. It was dated that day. The timestamp read 2:06 p.m., right in the middle of the worst system crash. Only one item was listed. Infant snow boots, size 0. No brand, no employee ID, just those terrifying, specific words. I stood there holding the paper, breathing too hard, feeling that same cold nausea creep in again. I didn't show it to anyone. I just put it in my pocket. The mall officially closed at 10 p.m. I stayed behind, claiming I had necessary paperwork to finish. The truth was, I couldn't leave yet. Not until I felt like I'd done something to try and make sense of the horror. On my way out, hours later, I passed an old janitor scrubbing something thick and sticky off the floor near the south entrance. I stopped and asked if he'd seen a kid. I described the clothes, the age, the terrifying bare feet. He didn't even blink. He just kept rhythmically mopping and said, with an unnerving calm, "Yeah, we get complaints about him every year." I asked what he meant, my voice barely a whisper. "Always on Black Friday," he said, pushing the mop. "Always around 2 in the afternoon. He's been dead a while. Trampled when this place used to be a major department store years ago. His mom brought him early 'cause she didn't have a sitter that day. The crowd rushed through the doors and, well, they say it happened right where your shop is now." I couldn't think of a single thing to say to that. I transferred out of that store 2 weeks later. No one asked why, and I didn't tell a soul the real reason. Story 4. The colossal outlet complex near my apartment. The Commerce Grave in our side of Meadowbrook officially unleashed its Black Friday madness at 5 a.m. But the fanatics, the true believers, had been establishing their grim encampment for a brutal 12 hours since the sun had vanished the previous night. I had taken a late-night drive, maybe 10 p.m., purely to gauge the level of mass hysteria. And the scene was straight-up disturbing. There were dense clusters of people parked on the sidewalk and landscaped islands, bundled tightly in military-grade sleeping bags. It looked less like shopping and more like an organized tailgate for an apocalypse, the grim precursor to some kind of doomsday sporting event. That lifestyle? Nah, not for this guy. I'm definitely a bargain hunter. Who doesn't crave a sweet discount? But committing to an overnight vigil on icy concrete and inhaling exhaust fumes just to snag a $200 discount feels like a line in the sand I will simply never cross. Yet, the main electronics powerhouse, the one they call Tectonic, had done its job. They had posted an online teaser for a limited stock, absolute must-have laptop deal earlier in the week, and the promise of that tech lingered in my mind. So I reluctantly surfaced from my sleep a little before 5:30 a.m., feeling like I'd been resurrected from a shallow grave. I stumbled into the kitchen and poured that desecrated freeze-dried excuse for coffee into my rugged thermos. The liquid was a dark, vile brown, tasting distinctly like someone had steeped scorched oak and hot municipal water. But it possessed the necessary searing heat and acidic punch to yank me, however painfully, toward full consciousness. I threw on my thickest fleece hoodie and headed out the door, the early morning chill already biting at the edges of the dark. By the time I guided my vehicle into the perimeter of the parking lot, the initial crowd had not just swelled, it had metastasized into a monstrous organism. People were everywhere, spilling over the curbs and parking dividers. You could instantly identify the battle-hardened veterans, those who had endured the cold night. Their faces were sallow, their hair plastered flat by knitted beanies, and their eyes held that distinctive, dead fish glaze of true exhaustion. They clutched enormous, neon-colored energy drinks, like they were vessels holding the last remnants of their mortal souls. Then there were the fresh recruits, the new arrivals like me. But they were quickly being subsumed by the established energy. The civilized concept of a queuing line had been utterly and violently shattered. What remained was an indiscriminate flesh-and-blood swarm. Shopping carts, those supposed instruments of commerce, were being weaponized, smashing into one another like out-of-control bumper cars in some hellish carnival. A man blasted past me, demonstrating inhuman dexterity by cradling two bulky toaster ovens in one arm while literally dragging a terrified-looking child with the other. Nearby, a woman was performing a truly inhumane balancing act, moving swiftly with a precarious totem pole of shoeboxes, all held together by elastic bungee cords. She moved with the unnerving stiffness of a person carrying a precious yet dreadfully cursed object. And throughout all this frantic motion, the air was infused with a persistent, sickening odor. A compound smell of heated rubber and deeply rancid industrial fried food, even though the entire food court section was still bolted shut and dark. The security personnel, the guys wearing the retina-searing lime-green neon vests, were stationed near the main entrances, but they were essentially useless statues. They were barely interacting, mostly staring blankly into the distance, occasionally lifting a radio to their mouths to utter some meaningless static, as if to feign control over the spiraling disorder. I quickly made the tactical decision to abandon the main entrance altogether. I slipped around to the flank of the building, near a boutique that was obviously not participating in the early morning bloodbath. This back channel led me to a secondary entrance where the foot traffic was mercifully lighter. The moment I stepped through the doors and into the enclosed space, the air assaulted me. It was thick, oppressively stale, and far too sultry and humid for the pre-dawn hour. Worse yet was the lighting. It was blatantly harsh and cast an awful, bilious yellow hue, as if the standard fixtures had been replaced with those cheap, malfunctioning fluorescent tubes typically found in the dankest corners of a forgotten subterranean bunker. This bizarre, unpleasant light rendered everything slightly off-kilter, giving the entire mall the appearance of a glitchy, low-resolution video game rendering rather than a real, functioning structure. I navigated quickly, weaving and dodging the early risers who were already glistening with sweat under their heavy winter coats. Tectonic was situated toward the absolute epicenter of the complex. By the time I reached the store's entrance, the towering stack of promotional laptop boxes was already half devoured. I lunged and snagged one box from near the base of the display, quickly confirming the crucial model number on the side, and then turned to head for the checkout line. And that's when I saw him, a child, standing completely alone by the store's main exit, barely 10 feet from where I stood. He looked utterly, chillingly out of place. He wore no jacket, only a threadbare, faded t-shirt featuring cartoon characters that were so obscure and peeling they looked like remnants from a television show that had been canceled, forgotten, and erased decades ago. His arms were disturbingly bony and pallid, and I noticed a strange, purplish, venous bruise around his elbows, suggesting a prolonged exposure to the brutal, external cold. But the detail that truly froze me was his utter stillness. He was not reacting, not weeping, not scanning the faces for a lost guardian. He was simply standing there, staring straight ahead with an unnerving intensity, as if awaiting some terrible, inevitable climax. He wasn't blinking. I hesitated for a full minute. Every instinct screams, "Don't engage with a random kid." But something about his silence and his appearance felt so profoundly, viscerally wrong that I couldn't possibly ignore him. I took a measured step closer. "Hey, sport," I said, my voice trying to sound casual. "You here with somebody?" He didn't flinch or acknowledge the sound for a moment. Then, with the slow, mechanical motion of a clockwork doll, he turned and fixed his gaze directly upon me. His eyes. God, they were the most alien thing I had ever witnessed. Not dramatically fiery or clouded with mist, but terrifyingly dull and flat. They looked like vacant sockets, like the windows were cleaned, but the actual inhabitant had checked out years ago. He seemed to be looking through me, not engaging with my presence at all. And then he spoke. "They don't breathe when they fall." It was an impossibly quiet utterance, yet the words resonated with shocking volume in the frantic store. I blinked, trying to compute the sheer non sequitur. "Excuse me? What was that?" He held his unblinking stare. He repeated the phrase, lower, slower, with a tone of macabre authority. "They don't breathe when they fall. That's how you can tell." My grip tightened, white-knuckled, around the expensive cardboard box. I frantically scanned the immediate area again, desperately hoping to see a mother or father rush over, say, "There you are, you little rascal," and gather him up. But no one, not a single shopper or store employee, seemed to register either his presence or my alarmed interaction with him. "Look, kid, are you all right? Are you totally lost?" I pressed. A thin, spectral smile surfaced on his lips. It was almost imperceptible, a slight pulling at the corners of his mouth, the kind of expression that suggests a deep, terrifying comprehension of a secret that the listener is hopelessly excluded from. Then he delivered the final, cold blow. "It already happened here. You're too late." Before I could even formulate a sensible response, before the horror of his words had fully registered in my brain, he executed a sharp, decisive turn and began to walk away. There was no stumble, no childish hesitation. He simply dissolved into the thick, roiling current of the crowd, moving with the preternatural certainty of someone following a map only visible to the damned. I followed. I didn't consciously choose to. The decision was ripped away from me, replaced by a sheer, cold, adrenaline-fueled instinct. My eyes caught the sight of his thin shoulders disappearing between two massive older women who were aggressively piloting carts burdened with various kitchen appliances. He never once glanced over his shoulder. He kept his unnervingly straight path, marching steadily past the chaos of the checkout lines and heading toward the farthest extreme of the mall, where the enormous, panoramic glass exit doors stood. Then, abruptly, he made a hard, decisive left turn, vanishing into a narrow, unassuming service corridor prominently labeled Maintenance. I accelerated my pace, clutching the $600 laptop box against my chest like it was the only talisman keeping me grounded in reality, and rounded the corner of the service hall only a few seconds after he disappeared. The corridor was absolutely, unnervingly empty. The entire space was built of monochromatic gray concrete underfoot, with a chaotic network of exposed ventilation pipes and electrical conduits directly overhead. The air here was heavy with that same burnt, caustic, metallic smell from the mall floor, but here it was intensified to an overwhelming, sickening stench. There were no internal doors, no side cubbies, just one long, desolate chute that terminated at a truly imposing, thick metal door, secured by a keycard reader. There was no physical way a child of his size and age could have operated that security lock or moved such a massive door. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath held tight in my chest. I strained my hearing, listening for any telltale sign, footsteps, a faint voice, the scrape of clothing. But there was absolutely nothing. No sound at all. Only the overpowering, deafening silence of the empty service tunnel. He had completely dematerialized. I slowly, cautiously, backed out of the forbidden hallway and returned to the terrifying throng of the main mall floor. I spent 5 frantic minutes attempting to spot him in the surging masses. Gone. Defeated and completely spooked, I located one of the indifferent security guards loitering near the central, overflowing decorative fountain and relayed the story. I offered a precise description of the child, the peeling shirt, and the exact spot I last saw him. The security officer, a heavy-set guy, barely lifted his gaze from his glowing phone screen. "Look, buddy," he said with an exasperated groan. "There are literally 1 million kids swarming this place today. Is your own kid missing or something?" I simply stood there, staring at the guard, offering no answer to his dismissive question. I simply turned away, walked back to the electronics store, paid for the laptop, and exited the scene of the horrific bazaar. Back in the safe, familiar quiet of my own apartment, I could not, for the life of me, expel that single, chillingly delivered sentence from my mind. They don't breathe when they fall. The cadence and subject matter were so specific, so morbid, it sounded like something lifted directly from a campfire ghost story or an unsolvable internet creepypasta. Operating on pure compulsion, I typed the phrase word for word into the Google search bar, fully expecting to discover some obscure, viral Reddit thread or a niche meme. Nothing appeared. My impulse shifted. I typed in a vague, unsettling query. Black Friday outlet mall death or injuries. I still didn't have a clear idea of what I was trying to find, merely following an escalating, icy feeling of profound dread. And then, I found it. It was an archived news article, dated 4 years prior. The location was precise. Meadowbrook Outlet. The store was the exact same electronics retailer. The date? Black Friday. The report detailed a stampede scenario when the main entrance doors were forcefully opened. One adult woman was listed as hospitalized with a compound fracture of the wrist. But the true tragedy was this. A child, a 7-year-old boy, had been separated from his mother in the initial crushing chaos. He had fallen, lost beneath the surge of humanity, and was subsequently trampled by the frenzied shoppers who could not, or would not, stop. He was pronounced dead at the scene, before emergency medical services could even arrive. Attached to the digital article was a small, low-resolution photograph. He was wearing the exact same faded t-shirt. His face was the same small, pallid shape, and his expression held that identical, terrible vacancy I had witnessed just a few hours prior. His name was Luke. I sat motionless for a profound length of time. The newly purchased laptop remained sealed in its box on the chipped formica of my kitchen table. The burnt toast coffee had long since cooled to the temperature of tap water in the thermos. The natural silence of my apartment suddenly felt oppressive and physically heavy, like a dense, malignant entity was actively pressing down on the ceiling directly above me. I did not sleep that night, and I did not return to the confines of that specific outlet mall for nearly a full calendar year. Story 5. I'd been pulling shifts part-time at this major electronics retailer, the Megavolt, just outside of Providence, for about 2 months. The store itself was tucked into a dreary strip mall that had clearly witnessed several bleaker decades. We were wedged like a forgotten molar between a dusty, cavernous pet supply warehouse and the skeletal remains of an old fitness center that had croaked back in late summer. Originally, I was off the hook for the brutal Black Friday overnight grind. My schedule had me booked for a simple midday shift, noon to 8. Easy money. But my manager, who we'll call Reese, rang me up right in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. Someone had bailed hard at the last minute, so I got forcibly tossed onto the graveyard shift, covering midnight to 6 a.m. Not ideal, man. Not at all. But Reese offered me time and a half pay, a sweetener I couldn't refuse. So, I bit the bullet. I showed up early, around 10:30 p.m. The parking lot was already a zoo, absolutely packed with people who apparently considered freezing their tails off in flimsy lawn chairs a worthwhile exchange for $20 off a massive flat screen. Inside, the store was transforming into a fortress. They had positioned enormous wooden pallets stacked high with discounted TVs right by the entrance, creating makeshift barricades. Boxes of smart speakers were stacked shoulder-high on those flimsy, temporary metal display towers, the kind that always look like they're one accidental customer elbow check away from a catastrophic avalanche. Reese immediately relegated me to the far reaches of the store. The appliance section, the clearance shelves, and a few lonely smart home demo units. It was perceptibly quieter back there. No direct sightlines to the main entrance, which meant I would be spared the initial tidal wave of consumer rage when the doors finally blew open. I was fine with that. Reese handed me one of those industrial plastic utility carts, which was loaded down with rolls of new signage, fragile price tags, tangled security wires, and an industrial amount of plastic zip ties. I started working the aisles, tightening up the numerous loose power cords, taping up the new limit one per customer flyers, and obsessively squaring up the stacks of microwave oven boxes. The main overhead lights were dimmed, standard procedure for pre-opening setup. But what was definitely not standard was the bone-deep cold. It wasn't just chilly. It was the kind of cold where you felt like your breath should be condensing in visible plumes. I paused near the emergency exit, right where the old wall-mounted thermostat was located, to check the setting. The digital display was completely blank. I assumed they were just trying to conserve power until the hordes arrived. But even accounting for that, the air held a viscous dampness that felt profoundly wrong. Almost exactly like standing inside a chilled, concrete mausoleum. Around 11:15 p.m., I passed by one of the smart home display units we usually ignored. It was a ridiculously basic, miniature refrigerator, the kind designed to hold a six-pack, rigged up to a digital timer for a purely aesthetic demonstration. It was purely for show, had no actual storage capacity, and had been non-functional since I started. But as I walked past this time, the internal compressor suddenly roared to life. The small LED screen blinked into activation, flashing a string of rapidly changing numbers, as if someone had just recently and aggressively adjusted the internal settings. I stopped cold, staring at it for a long second. I was dead certain it had been completely inert earlier. I walked up to the front section and found Omar, one of the resident tech guys, and asked if anyone was plugging in the floor models early. He gave me a puzzled, vacant look and said, "What floor models are you even talking about?" I mentioned the small fridge unit. He shook his head, instantly denying it. He explained that that entire section wasn't even wired for active power. It was all decorative props. I walked back and checked the wall outlet, still unplugged. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had accidentally tripped a breaker somewhere, and the timer had some massive, residual battery backup. Who knew? I dismissed it and moved on. 10 minutes later, I circled back to the same aisle to re-secure a speaker stand that some previous shift had left wobbly. This time, the fridge door was wide open. Not ajar, but gaping. The internal shelves were all gone, completely removed. In their place, sitting dead center on the middle rack, was a single, strange object. It was a barcode scanner, the old-school gun-shaped plastic model with a long, satisfying trigger. We hadn't used that kind of technology in literal years. Our entire inventory system was tablet-based now. Even the warehouse guys used high-tech handhelds. But this scanner was unlike any equipment we'd ever possessed. It looked homemade, cobbled together. The plastic handle was a faded, sickly yellow, and the side casing had something crudely etched into it with what looked like a soldering iron or some other blunt, heated tool. The etching simply read, Carlin. I'd never heard the brand name. It certainly wasn't store-issued. It was laid down with a terrifying sense of purpose, pointed inward, not tossed or abandoned, but placed. I quickly snapped a picture of it on my phone, just in case, and then asked around to see if anyone was setting up a retro tech display or something equally mundane. Everyone either shrugged or gave me a blank look. Reese just shot me a weird, impatient look and ordered, "If it's not on the manifest, pitch it." But I couldn't. I left it sitting exactly where it was, inside the opened, cold fridge. At the stroke of midnight, the main doors exploded inward. The crowd poured in like a sudden, angry flood. Total, unadulterated chaos. People were grabbing anything they could haul, yelling for non-existent discounts, trying to price match against websites that hadn't even existed in a decade. I was consumed by the necessary madness, and didn't think about the strange fridge again until nearly 2 a.m. It was close to 2 a.m. when a frantic woman approached the front counter and told the associate that her young son had somehow wandered off toward the back aisles and gotten trapped behind a large palletized display. Since I was the only staff member patrolling that deep end of the store, they dispatched me. I walked back to the appliance section. No sign of a kid, no voices, no indication that anyone had been back there at all. Except for the fridge. Now, it was sealed shut. Someone had used thick, black electrical tape and deliberately wound it around the door handle, wrapping it 4 or 5 times, pulling it tight enough to bite savagely into the rubber grip. I knelt down and peered through the small, thick glass panel on the door. The strange scanner was gone. In its place sat a single, chilling item. An employee ID badge. It was red plastic, a vertical layout with a stark, single white stripe running down one side. It had no barcode, no identifying magnetic strip, only a name printed in a block font. Amy. No last name, no job title. We hadn't used this particular design of badge since before the massive store remodel, a change that happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I carefully peeled off the tape, opened the door, and took the badge. I brought it up to one of the active registers and swiped it across the scanner. Nothing happened. Not even the customary error beep. Absolutely no response at all. I showed it to Reese. He stared at the old red plastic for a long moment. Finally, he confirmed, "Amy?" "Yeah, there was an Amy. She was an inventory management girl. But she quit ages ago. Way before the store floor plan changed. Way before we got the new system." I pressed him. "Did she work last Black Friday? The big one?" Reese didn't directly answer. He simply told me to toss the badge and get back to taping down sale signs. Instead, I kept it. I slipped the unsettling artifact into my personal locker during my 10-minute break. I wasn't even sure why I was protecting it. It just felt too deliberate to discard. Around 4 a.m., someone completely trashed the tile near the checkout with a massive coffee spill. Reese asked me to quickly grab towels and the wet vac from the janitor's closet, which was located in the dark, forgotten hallway leading toward the defunct gym next door. I went without thinking, just wanting to clear the mess. The hallway was equipped with motion-activated lights, but they failed to engage. I walked the entire length of the corridor in pitch blackness, using only the feeble glow of my phone screen to keep me from tripping over a mop bucket or an errant cleaning supply. As I passed the enormous plate glass windows of the abandoned gym, I noticed something profoundly unsettling. All the ellipticals inside, at least a dozen of them, had been rotated to face the hallway. They were lined up shoulder to shoulder at the glass, staring straight out, like a silent skeletal audience waiting for a performance. Earlier in the night, I was positive they had been angled toward the interior mirrors, the way you normally arrange gym equipment. Then, my gaze locked onto the farthest corner. One single treadmill, isolated near the wall, was moving. The belt was gliding slowly, steadily, even though there was no one on it. There were no console lights, no sound of an engine humming, just this unnatural, silent mechanical glide. And resting precisely on the handrail of that moving, empty treadmill was the red employee badge. The very one I had just securely locked inside my personal break room locker less than 2 hours prior. I patted my hoodie pocket, a frantic, purely instinctual motion, 3 times before I broke into a full-out sprint. I slammed back into the break room and threw open my locker. Empty. Completely, chillingly empty. Even the slightly crushed sandwich I'd packed was gone. I didn't utter a word to anyone. I just sat through the remaining hour of my shift, mostly walking the aisles with a forced, manic attention, pretending to retape signs that didn't need it. At 5:30 a.m., we began the process of tearing down the Black Friday sale signage. I passed the mini-fridge one final time, intending to tape off the appliance aisle for the day. It was closed again, but there was no electrical tape this time. I opened it. Inside, curled up and damp with condensation, was a single, long receipt. It bore the date of today, November 28th, but the year was jarringly wrong. It read, 2019. There was only a single cryptic line item. Exit code, CR40. The total was listed as voided, with no corresponding price or product name. I showed the receipt to the loss prevention manager. He barely spared it a glance. He declared it was probably just an old training slip that had been mistakenly mixed in with the demo units. But I ran the code, CR40, through our current system later that morning. It didn't exist. Not in our inventory, not in the archived sheets. Nothing. At precisely 6 a.m., I clocked out. I didn't say goodbye to Reese or Omar. I just walked straight out the door. After that night, I permanently stopped accepting any shift that required working after midnight. I still take retail jobs sometimes, but never at the Megavolt. And never again on Black Friday. Story 6. I was a green 23 when I took the graveyard shift at this major retailer, the Grand Emporium, located in a tired suburb we called Crestwood. That year, the infamous Black Friday doorbuster chaos was scheduled to detonate precisely at midnight. I had willingly signed up for the overnight hours, chasing that sweet, sweet holiday cash. They ultimately assigned me to the second floor, specifically the area near the fitting rooms outside the women's wear and lingerie section. I was A-okay with that, honestly. It meant I was miles away from the brutal, hellish brawl over electronics or the soul-crushing returns line downstairs. My primary task was simple, almost meditative. Maintain order. Meticulously fold any clothing that shoppers carelessly dumped. Dispense those little numbered plastic tags when customers wanted to utilize a stall, and unlock the fitting rooms on request. That was the entire gig. By approximately 2 in the morning, the initial frenzy had largely migrated to the lower level. I could still detect the muffled, persistent hum of chaos. A distant buzz from the tech department, someone occasionally screaming about a TV deal, the thin wail of a tired kid, and the distorted voice of management over the intercom. But my immediate zone had descended into an almost supernatural quiet. It was, strangely, quite peaceful. From my station behind the counter, I had a clean, uninterrupted sightline down the long, arterial corridor that ran between the activewear display and the racks of heavy winter coats. It was just a desolate stretch of tile, with one wall lined completely with enormous reflective mirrors, and the opposite side occasionally marked by a few rolling racks of merchandise. Nothing obstructed the view. No promotional displays, no towering mannequins, just a long, cold, open space. I was deep in the focused work of folding a mountain of scarves, my hands working almost automatically, when a woman approached me. She looked profoundly out of it. Her eyes were heavy with fatigue, and she held her smartphone like she'd just checked the hour and was already wrestling with a severe case of buyer's remorse for being out so late. She asked me, her voice thin, "Did my little girl walk back this way?" and made a vague gesture toward the cluster of fitting rooms. I told her I wasn't certain, but I would absolutely check for her. I called out toward the curtained stalls, a casual but clear, "Hey, anyone back there right now?" The response was total, immediate silence. I then asked the woman for a description of her daughter. She replied that the child was 6 years old and was wearing a bright red hoodie and a pair of sparkly silver tights. I remember those details with perfect clarity. Bright colors, glitter, easily spotted. I told the mother I hadn't seen any children pass by my post. She didn't seem panicked or distressed. She merely nodded, looking preoccupied, and then slowly wandered off in the direction of the handbag department. I figured the girl had probably already found her way back to her mother. Parents get easily frazzled during these major sales, so I returned to my folding duties. A few minutes later, maybe 5, perhaps even less, I caught a flicker of color in my peripheral vision. I instantly looked up and saw a distinct red hoodie standing perfectly still by the mirrors, right next to the coat racks at the far end of the corridor. It was simply standing there, not examining merchandise, not moving, just facing the reflection. It was the girl. I stepped out from behind the counter a little, trying to maintain a friendly distance, and called out to her. No reaction. She didn't flinch, didn't shift her weight. I began walking toward her, slowly. Something about her posture was deeply, instinctively wrong. Her arms were hanging perfectly straight down, rigid, almost catatonic, as if she was using every ounce of effort to maintain this unnatural stillness. It wasn't the kind of stillness a kid adopts when they're playing a game. This was different. Cold. I spoke gently, my voice low. "Hey there, sweetie. Are you okay?" As I drew closer, she rotated her head, only a minimal angle, just enough for me to catch a partial glimpse of her face in the gloom. And the expression she offered me, it wasn't the look of a frightened child, a lost child, or even a blank-faced child. It looked as if she were straining not to laugh, like she was holding something immense inside. It wasn't joy. It was a terrifying, muscular tension, a kind of fixed, cold grin that had no business being on the face of a 6-year-old standing completely alone at 2 a.m. I crouched down a bit, attempting to meet her eye level, and asked softly if her mother was downstairs. She offered no verbal response. No blink, no nod, no movement. She simply turned her small body away from me and walked past. Not hurrying, not trying to sneak away, but moving with a direct, unsettling stride, as if she already possessed a definitive, inescapable destination. She walked straight into the fitting room area. I immediately followed her, stepping into the fitting room zone right behind her. It wasn't the large space, just 2 predictable rows of stalls, 6 on each side. Most of the doors were currently ajar. I quickly checked beneath the closed doors. Nothing. No small feet, no sounds of movement or breathing. I tapped lightly on a couple of the closed stalls, then wrestled open the final one on the right, the one that always requires you to lift the handle just so to prevent it from sticking. empty. I stood there, utterly confused, then whipped around to see if she had somehow slipped back out into the main store. I ran to the edge of the escalator opening and leaned over the railing, frantically scanning the entire lower level. No flash of red hoodie. I yanked a walkie-talkie from my belt and radioed the floor supervisor immediately. I informed her that I strongly suspected a very young girl was alone and wandering the second floor. Within just a few minutes, she arrived, flanked by one of the store security guards, and we began a meticulous, coordinated sweep of the entire level. We checked every dark corner, every shadowed aisle, even the bedding section, where exhausted employees sometimes tried to sneak a few minutes of rest beneath the heavy comforters during the long, brutal shifts. Nothing. Eventually, another associate managed to locate the mother again, deep within the housewares department, crouched near a display of blenders. This time, the child was securely with her. The girl looked precisely as I remembered. Red hoodie, sparkly tights, same messy, shaggy bangs. She was holding a small pink blanket in one hand and staring blankly into the distance. The mother looked at me with an air of mild annoyance, as if I'd asked a truly idiotic question, and said, "She's been right here with me the whole time." And the girl? She didn't even acknowledge my presence with a glance. She just stood there, staring over my shoulder, as if something far more intriguing, far more dreadful, existed just behind me. That terrifyingly fixed expression she'd given the mirror earlier, it was the same look now. I instinctively knew not to push the issue. I didn't mention my frightening encounter. Not because I doubted the clear evidence of my own eyes, but because something about her entire demeanor, the unnatural posture, the cold, holding grin, made me feel an inexplicable sense of deep, physiological unease. I couldn't explain it without sounding completely paranoid and unhinged. Later, around 4 a.m., I headed into the back stockroom hallway to retrieve a rolling merchandise rack. That rear quarter of the store is typically kept sealed and locked down during major sales to prevent customers from wandering into unauthorized, sensitive areas. But the heavy metal door was cracked wide open. It had been propped, jammed open in fact, by one of the fire extinguishers. It was one of the busted units we had pulled from the wall the week before, waiting for the maintenance crew to come haul it away. As I pulled the rack out of the storage room, my gaze dropped to the tile floor, and I froze. There were footprints on the tile. Small, distinct, bare feet. They looked visibly damp and muddy, as if someone had deliberately stepped through wet, saturated ground, and then walked directly in a perfectly straight, linear path down the length of the hall, heading straight toward the employee locker room. The prints were not smeared or scattered, suggesting running or confusion. They were a neat, deliberate trail of footsteps, one right after the other, leading directly toward an area that was locked and strictly off-limits to every customer. I didn't call out. I didn't dare follow the trail. I simply backed the rack out of the doorway and walked straight, fast, toward the supervisor's primary desk. I told her exactly what I had witnessed. She looked dubious, but came with me to verify. When we returned to the service hallway, the door was still propped open by the fire extinguisher. But the trail of bare, muddy footprints was gone. The tile floor was completely spotless, not a single trace remaining. I even bent down and deliberately wiped my sleeve across the floor where the mud had been. Nothing. The fire extinguisher, however, had been kicked aside, pushed out of the door frame. We stood there in the chilling silence for a long, unsettling minute. She didn't offer any explanation, and I didn't press her for one. Then, she simply instructed me to stay near the main counter for the remainder of my shift. I finished my shift around 6 a.m. and clocked out without ceremony. I drove home, peeled off my work uniform, and tossed it straight into the washing machine. As I was going through the final check of my pockets, I felt something small, hard, and strange inside the chest pocket of my work shirt. It was one of the small, numbered plastic tags we used to give out at the fitting rooms. This one was marked with the single digit, 6. The Grand Emporium closed down permanently the following year. Corporate released a completely bland statement about underperforming sales and location challenges. But I knew better. I still have the tag, and I've never gone back to that side of town. Story 7. It was only a few years back that I was logging hours part-time at a major retail warehouse, the Citadel, situated deep in a quiet suburb called North Bend, a desolate 25-minute drive from the sprawling chaos of Cincinnati. The moment the final pieces of Halloween decor were packed away, it was as if the management switched into a state of hyper-aggressive military readiness. We were subjected to mandatory strategy meetings twice a week that year, drills designed to prepare us for the consumer onslaught. Black Friday, the day of corporate judgment, fell on November 29th. I was handed the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, stuck right in the pit of despair, the electronics pit. This was the designated containment zone for every high-value item that shoppers might potentially literally commit violence over. The coveted new gaming consoles, the cutting-edge headphones, the immense 4K television sets, the whole chaotic shebang. The sheer level of devotion from the public was, frankly, terrifying. People had started establishing their frozen, pathetic camps outside the store perimeter before most families had even finished their Thanksgiving turkey. By 11:58 p.m., I was locked in position behind the secured, reinforced glass counter that housed the latest generation gaming systems, clutching a small, damp clipboard covered in pre-printed voucher numbers. The plan was brutally simplistic. We had precisely 30 consoles, corresponding to 30 sacred vouchers. No voucher, no dice, no hardware. End of the debate. The clock hands converged on midnight. The enormous industrial front doors burst inward. The sound was beyond a mere roar. It was an animalistic explosion. It wasn't just typical shouting, it was the sharp, panicked sound of hundreds of adults full-out sprinting across the polished concrete floor, their footfalls echoing like a stampede of the damned. They ran as if they truly believed management was handing out pure gold bars to the first wave. Within a dizzying 2 minutes, the entire store floor became a crushingly claustrophobic hellscape. Every single major aisle was instantly jammed solid. Metal shopping carts created impassable, dangerous choke points, and somewhere in the distance, someone had already managed to catastrophically obliterate a towering display of fragile tablets. But I held the line. I kept my head down, locked myself into my tiny, protected zone, and focused purely on the vouchers. At precisely 12:12 a.m., a man detached himself from the mob and materialized in front of my counter. He did not possess a voucher. He looked to be in his mid-40s, bundled up in a heavy dark coat and a voluminous gray hoodie that was pulled so low over his forehead I could barely discern his features. The most unnerving element was that he wasn't yelling, wasn't shoving, and wasn't moving with the typical consumer hysteria. He simply walked right up to my secured counter and settled there, uncomfortably close, closer than any stranger should dare to be in that kind of crush. He spoke in a low, almost intimate whisper that cut through the noise. "I need one of the consoles, now." I deployed the standard, simple defense. "I'm sorry, sir, it's strictly voucher only. No voucher, no console." He remained absolutely silent for a drawn-out, eerie beat. Then, he executed a small, unsettling tilt of his head, a motion that seemed uncanny and unnatural, and dropped the bomb. "You've got more in the back of the bay. I personally saw the freight truck come in yesterday." I froze. Every single muscle in my body seized up. He delivered the words with a chilling sense of personal knowledge, as if we were stock associates discussing the day's delivery manifest. Then, He magnified the dread by adding a specific detail that was impossible for a regular shopper to know. Mark was the one unloading the pallet jacks. You, specifically, were restocking the big JBL speakers on the modular shelving Tuesday afternoon. He was 100% accurate. Mark was our usual stock guy, and I had spent a miserable, exhausting Tuesday afternoon wrestling with heavy audio boxes. Yet, I had never once encountered this man before in my entire life. I was profoundly certain of it. A strange, fearful laugh escaped my throat as I tried to regain my composure. "That's not how the inventory tracking works, man," I stammered, attempting to keep my voice light, firm, and aggressively polite. I repeated the rule about the vouchers. He just stared. No blink, no reaction, no change in his posture. He looked at me with an intense, clinical scrutiny, like he was cataloging my every facial feature, ensuring he would have a perfect recollection of me for some unspecified, awful future purpose. Then, he displayed a micro-expression, a chilling, almost robotic twitch of a smile at the corner of his mouth, and simply turned and walked off. I should have immediately shaken the event off as a bizarre moment with a hyper-observant consumer. But the unsettling precision of his statements, the truck delivery schedule, the layout of the back room, the specific mention of Mark, and my job on Tuesday. It was all too specific, too invasive to be a casual guess. The knowledge settled deep in my gut, a cold, metallic feeling that refused to dissipate. Maybe 20 minutes after the initial chilling exchange, my sense of panic returned with a vengeance. I saw him again. He was positioned right in the heart of the main sales floor, standing motionless in the aisle that formed the gauntlet between the huge TV displays and the mobile tablet towers. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He was just standing still, both hands plunged deep into the pockets of his dark coat, his covered head slightly bowed, watching the entire scene. He had no shopping cart, no empty bags, nothing to suggest participation in the retail madness. He was an unmoving, silent predator in a sea of frantic motion. I quickly grabbed my walkie-talkie and alerted my supervisor, a harried woman who barely lifted her chin from her console. "Oh, that's probably a flipper," she dismissed instantly. "They try to intimidate people into handing over their paper vouchers, or they follow them out to their cars to try and rip them off." But this guy wasn't engaging anyone. He wasn't talking. He wasn't even making eye contact with the shoppers. He was simply staring with an unsettling intensity. Then, just as silently and swiftly as before, he was gone. Vanished. At the 2 o'clock mark, I took my 15-minute scheduled break. I retreated deep into the employee-only sanctum, the back hallway behind the receiving dock. It was a narrow, claustrophobic corridor of chipped paint that housed a tiny, usually filthy bathroom and an old, temperamental vending machine that constantly ate currency. The silence back here was a profound relief, a temporary respite from the consumer inferno. I was leaning against the machine, focused on texting my girlfriend, trying to physically and mentally decompress from the night's overwhelming tension, when I detected a subtle shift in the ambient gloom down the length of the hall. I snapped my head up. He was standing at the absolute dead end of the employee hallway. Same heavy coat, same deep-pulled gray hood, just staring. That entire area is strictly restricted. You need an electronic key badge to even unlock the secured metal door that grants access. He wasn't wearing any visible identification. "You can't be back here. This is staff only," I yelled, my voice ringing out, sounding hoarse and terrified even to my own ears. He offered no response. He didn't flinch, didn't move an inch, didn't even acknowledge the piercing sound of my voice. I began cautiously backing toward the main door, my hands trembling violently as I tried to hold my phone steady enough to dial emergency services. My palms were suddenly slick with a cold, desperate sweat. When I glanced back up after a moment of fumbling, he was gone. Again. I immediately ran to the assistant manager's office and detailed everything. The encounter, the specific knowledge he possessed, the chilling appearance in the employee-only zone. Debbie nodded, said she would alert the security team. But she repeated the grim truth. With the building operating at this level of sustained chaos, they couldn't afford to divert resources to actively pursue one guy, unless he was caught in the act of felony theft. I didn't argue the point, but the terrible thought resonated in my mind. He wasn't there to steal merchandise. He was there to steal something else. For the rest of my shift, I was a bundle of raw nerves. I couldn't stop snapping my head around, convinced I would see that hooded figure reflected in the glossy black screen of a television. Every random cough, every creaking sound, every distant cart scrape made me jump out of my skin. Then, around 5:15 a.m., I was again behind the main counter, obsessively straightening the worthless plastic display boxes. I heard something feather light right behind the immense wooden pallet that sat next to the power strip section. It was my name, spoken in a dry, horrifying whisper that seemed to defy the acoustics of the building. I spun around, adrenaline surging like pure electricity. He was crouched low, his eyes visible as he peeked out from behind the pallet. To this day, I have zero rational explanation for how he achieved that position without being spotted, as the area is boxed in and accessible only via the secured stockroom. He didn't speak another word. He just stared, his eyes fixed on mine, and made a strange two-fingered beckoning motion, silently urging me to approach him. My brain completely shut down. I didn't think about my job, my paycheck, or the protocol. I simply backed away, turned my back on the counter, and walked straight off the floor. I found my shift lead and lied, stammering that I was violently ill, a medical emergency. I didn't care what they logged it as. I grabbed my personal coat from the staff room and bolted directly toward the emergency exit near the receiving dock, the shortest possible route to freedom. I slammed the bar. The piercing, high-pitched alarm instantly shrieked through the quiet back halls, and I walked straight out into the freezing pre-dawn air. I sat in my car in the far corner of the parking lot, the engine off, for a solid 10 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to risk turning the key. The next day, I received a call from store security. They asked if I was personally acquainted with the man. I told them definitively no. They explained that after I left, they had painstakingly reviewed the surveillance footage. The tapes clearly showed him entering the store with the first crush of customers. He was captured on one camera near the TV displays, then on another camera near the employee hallway, and finally, crouched chillingly by the pallet. But there was no available footage of him ever leaving the building. They had rewound every tape, searched every corner, the bathrooms, all stockrooms, the loading dock area, even the roof access hatches. Nothing. He had simply vanished into the physical structure of the store. I quit that week. I transferred my credits to a new college campus miles away, and I took a new, blessedly calm job working at a small independent bookstore downtown, where the only thing I have to worry about is the musty smell of old paper. I have not worked retail on Black Friday since. Story 8. A few years back, I snagged the Black Friday shift at this huge, chaotic discount warehouse, the Bargain Crypt, just outside a tiny, blink-and-you'll-miss-it town called Oak Hollow, roughly 20 minutes from my apartment. My friends always cracked jokes that the place only ever achieved true life during the Halloween costume rush, and when they cleared out the fire-damaged microwaves. But hey, the paychecks were reliable, and I was hard up for the cash. We were scheduled to rip open the doors at 5 a.m. But by 4:30 a.m., the mob scene was already in full effect. People were pressed tight against the plate glass entrance, their faces obscured by the shadows and reflections, making them look like a silent, demanding legion waiting for a bizarre, unscheduled concert. I clocked in at 4 sharp. My first hour was on door control, the front lines. Then I was banished to the madness of the electronics department. I remember thinking, just gotta survive until noon, knowing that if I could hit that mark, someone else would take the reins and I could go pass out in a dark room at home. This was my second holiday rodeo there. I wasn't the new kid on the block anymore, but I still felt like I was perpetually playing a role. Every time I cinched the mandatory work vest, I became this artificially polite, utterly emotionless version of myself. A customer service automaton who could somehow maintain a terrifying composure even when people were screaming bloody murder over a flawed HDMI cable. By 6 a.m., the store floor looked less like a retail operation and more like the immediate aftermath of a full-scale ransacking. Those huge corrugated bins overflowing with discount DVDs were utterly torn apart. Discs scattered like metallic confetti everywhere. I watched one woman use her entire arm to simply sweep a massive pile of movies into her cart, handling them with the casual indifference of someone shoveling snow off a driveway. Near the toy section, a toddler took a nasty fall and got momentarily stepped on. His mother swiftly yanked him up, but instead of comforting him, she simply kept shopping, as if she didn't have a single second to waste on such trivial human drama. Meanwhile, a massive guy was attempting a feat of impossible engineering, trying to forcefully cram a boxed 32-inch television into a flimsy plastic cart that was clearly half its size. I instinctively stepped in to help him, angling the bulky box just enough to achieve a momentary, dangerous balance. He offered no verbal thanks, just a quick, sharp nod. He was a tall guy, completely bald, perhaps late 60s, wearing a jacket, an olive green windbreaker that looked a little too crisp, a little too clean, in contrast to his generally weary appearance. Honestly, the interaction was completely forgotten until I saw him again. Maybe 20 minutes later, I was power walking past the home goods section, taking a shortcut on my way to help an associate unlock a secured display case. And there he was, standing off to the side. He wasn't browsing the kitchenware, wasn't looking at any product labels, just watching the foot traffic. At first, my sleep-deprived brain tried to convince me I was having a waking delusion. I even executed that awkward, forced smile you deploy when you mistakenly make eye contact with a stranger. He offered zero response. Just that blank, dead expression, like he wasn't truly seeing me, but rather meticulously studying a specimen. I kept moving, telling myself that people do profoundly weird stuff when they are running on no sleep and are caffeinated to the point of a medical emergency. But then, 10 minutes later, my gut clenched. I spotted him again, this time much closer to the front of the store, standing in a small, empty pocket of space near the restrooms. Same chilling pattern. No cart, no browsing, just standing and staring. That time, the feeling hit me like a physical blow. You know that visceral sense of pure wrongness, where your conscious mind tries to desperately rationalize, but your body is already screaming danger? My chest tightened into a sudden, painful knot, and I had absolutely no logical reason why. I tried to mentally file him away as a simple loiterer, one of those miserable old men who gets unwillingly dragged to the store and kills time while his wife shops. Still, I made sure to glue myself to other coworkers for the next hour. By 7:30 a.m., I was back in the electronics pit, helping run a register to expedite the massive lines. We had a queue snaking halfway down the aisle, and the old register terminal was notoriously prone to freezing if you scanned items too quickly. I was working a relentless rhythm. Scan, bag, avoid eye contact, repeat. Then, I looked up. And there he was again, the bald guy, right in front of my register. This time, he had 3 items. Just 3 simple things: a pack of generic batteries, a cheap phone charging brick, and one of those prepaid disposable flip phones we kept locked behind the counter. I gave him the standard, painfully cheerful, "Hey there, how's it going today?" that I was required to deliver, but he didn't respond. Didn't even blink. He simply placed the items down in front of me with an unnerving delicacy, like he was handing off physical evidence. I scanned the batteries first. The electronic beep of the scanner suddenly sounded deafeningly loud in the chaos. Then the charger, then the phone. As I reached for the button to print the final receipt, he leaned in slowly, both hands bracing against the counter ledge. "What time does your shift end?" he asked. The voice was utterly flat, devoid of expression or emotion, delivered with the cadence of someone inquiring about the current weather conditions. I didn't answer. I just quickly finalized the sale and stated the total amount due. But he made no move toward his wallet. He just stood there, still watching me. "What time are you finished working here?" he repeated. This time, his voice dropped slightly, taking on a subtle, colder intimacy, as if he was ensuring I heard it perfectly, but no one else around us would register the threat. I forced myself to maintain my professional composure. I politely informed him that we were not permitted to share our work schedule information with customers. Company policy, something about employee safety. That, at least, was a genuine rule. He slowly produced a wad of cash and laid it out meticulously, bill by bill, precise down to the final penny. Then he offered that terrible, cold smile. "I'll just wait then," he said, and then he walked away. But he didn't take his bag. The 3 items, the batteries, the charger, and the flip phone, were still sitting right there on the counter in front of me. I picked up the small, sealed bag, turned to call out to him, but he was already gone. Not walking off down the crowded aisle, but simply vanished. I immediately told my manager. He dismissed it with a tired, half-laugh, half-shrug, saying, "What am I supposed to do? The guy was probably just some lonely weirdo who got his kicks watching people shop." He told me to put the items in the lost and found bin and forget about it. So I did. Nothing else happened until my mandatory break an hour later. I went to the back staff room, settled down with a sadly squashed vending machine sandwich, and finally checked my phone. 5 missed calls. All from the exact same number. No name, just a local area code. As I was trying to decide if I dared call it back, a text message instantly popped up. "You on lunch?" My throat immediately seized up. I could physically feel the dryness, like I hadn't swallowed in hours. I walked straight to the manager's office. This time, he didn't brush it off. He told me to stay put in the break room and immediately radioed for the security guards to sweep the surrounding parking lot. I went to the tiny break room window, just a small square pane crusted with ancient tape and grime, and waited in terrified silence. A few minutes later, one of the security guards walked in holding something. A phone. Not mine, not even the same model. The guard said that some man had walked up to him outside, asked for me by name, and claimed that I had dropped it. My own phone was charged and still securely in my hand. The man was already gone by the time the police showed up. The police reviewed the security footage. They confirmed he entered at 5:05 a.m. and spent the next 3 hours walking the store perimeter. They still had no clear image of his face. In every frame, he was either looking down or actively looking away from the lens. They confirmed he didn't buy anything, and he didn't leave through the front exit. The only person he ever exchanged words with was me. The very next day I came in for my evening shift. I unlocked the electronics cabinet as usual to check for any overnight returns, and there, tucked just under the sliding door, was a receipt. Not hidden, just deliberately placed there for me to find. There was nothing written on it, no notes, just the standard printout. The timestamp matched. The 3 items matched, and my employee ID, my name, was printed right there on the bottom line. I immediately checked the inventory system. The transaction was real. The sale had processed. But the bag of items never made it to Lost and Found, and customer service never processed a return. The items were simply gone. A week later, on my day off, I was sleeping in when my mom tapped on my bedroom door. She said a man had come by the house asking for me. She said he was polite, calm, and asked if I was currently home. When she told him I wasn't, he simply smiled and walked away. She asked if he was someone from work. My voice trembling, I asked her what he looked like. She confirmed, tall, bald, perhaps late 60s. That night, I quit. No 2 weeks' notice. I just called the manager and said I couldn't possibly return. He didn't even ask why. The store filed a police report, but they had almost nothing to go on. No license plate, no last name, nothing on file. I changed my number that same week, switching phones completely for the next few months. I didn't go anywhere alone. I even temporarily skipped my college classes. That was 6 years ago. I still have no idea how he acquired my personal phone number, how he definitively knew my work schedule, or how he managed to track down my actual address. My social media is private, and I am hyper-vigilant about listing my workplace anywhere online. Every single year, without fail, when Black Friday rolls around, I stay home. I don't move, and I don't answer the phone. Story 9. That year, I was the unlucky soul who drew the Black Friday opening shift at the glorified electronic depot where I worked. The shift kicked off at 4 in the morning, which was exactly as soul-crushingly miserable as it sounds. My job title was security, which in reality meant I mostly just stood around in a cheap uniform, attempting to project an aura of non-existent authority while meticulously avoiding eye contact with the sharks. The store itself was located in a depressing, mid-sized shopping plaza near a town called Crestview, one of those catch-all retail joints that sold everything from cheap sound bars and junky mini-fridges to overpriced printer ink. It certainly wasn't a career move, but hey, it beat the alternative of folding jeans in some sterile mall clothing store. The doors were slated to unlock at 5 a.m. I rolled in about 20 minutes prior, and the parking lot already looked like a chaotic mashup of a low-budget camping site and a full-scale riot. Pop-up tents were deployed right along the sidewalk, kids in heavy hoodies huddled over flimsy styrofoam cups of coffee, and 2 distinct groups were already aggressively yelling about who had the rightful claim to the front-of-the-line position. I walked the perimeter of the store, performed a quick radio check-in to my manager, a woman named Brenda, whose voice always sounded like she was perpetually suffering from a migraine of epic proportions, and then I took up my official position by the front doors. We had these flimsy metal barriers deployed, but they were purely for show. They wouldn't have deterred a single customer if the situation turned south. They were there just to create the illusion of a strategy. 5 o'clock hit. The doors slid open, and boom! Total, instantaneous chaos. People poured inside like a dam had violently ruptured. You would have thought they were desperately rushing to escape a sudden, life-threatening fire, not fighting over deeply discounted air fryers. Carts were immediately banging together with the sound of a fender bender, and I heard someone emit a primal scream of triumph before they had even grabbed a single item. That initial rush, honestly, didn't even faze me anymore. It was a predictable, terrifying routine, a kind of aggressive, highly plastic retail ballet. It was around 5:20 a.m. when the first truly odd transmission buzzed in my earpiece. One of the cashiers, a girl named Jenna, called me. Her voice was quiet, laced with an undeniable air of puzzlement. "Hey, I've got this guy back in appliances. He's just standing there, not shopping, not moving." I asked if he looked ill or maybe disoriented. She said, "No, not sick, just still." So I walked over to the appliance section. I could see him from halfway down the aisle. He had his back to me, facing an entire wall stacked with various microwave ovens. He possessed no cart, no shopping bags, nothing in his hands. He was just standing there, arms loose and hanging by his sides. It was instantly unsettling because nobody stands still on Black Friday. Everyone is perpetually darting around like they are engaged in a frantic, timed challenge. I approached him slowly from behind, keeping my tone deliberately casual. "Sir, is everything all right? You doing okay?" No answer. I stepped carefully beside him, trying to catch his face. His eyes were open, way too wide open. He looked utterly locked in, as if he were hyper-focused on the microwave display, except all the units were completely unplugged. No glowing digital screens, no indicator lights, just silent stacks of silver boxes. I started again. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" He turned. Not with a sudden jolt, not like I had successfully startled him, but with an unnervingly slow, calm pivot. He walked away from me as if I were utterly invisible. No eye contact, no reaction to my uniform, just moving deliberately past me and rounding the corner of the aisle. I immediately followed him, only a few seconds behind. But when I swung around the corner, the aisle was empty. I jogged through the nearby rows, checked the heavy warehouse door, even peeked into the employee stockroom. Nothing. The store wasn't that massive. There were only so many places a person could go. I stood there for a long moment, listening, trying to formulate a logical, mundane explanation. Someone couldn't just evaporate like that. I radioed it in, giving Brenda the basic details. Black hoodie, gray sweatpants, maybe mid-30s. She didn't sound remotely concerned. It simply wasn't a big enough incident to warrant her leaving her protective perch in the office. Still, the image of that man standing there, that unmoving, unsettling stillness, it clung to me like cold, wet silk. About an hour later, I was behind the customer service desk, staring blankly at the wall of security monitors. I have this habit of letting my eyes drift across the feeds, treating them like visual background noise. But then, my eyes snagged and stopped. One of the feeds, the camera trained on the TV wall, had a figure in it. Standing dead center in the middle of the aisle. Same rigid posture, same unnatural stillness. It was him. A cold, violent twist hit me deep in my gut. This was no longer a simple weirdo or a minor prank. I rushed toward the TV section. I didn't even bother with the aisle shortcuts. I went straight through the main floor, aggressively cutting between confused customers. He was gone again. I grabbed one of the floor techs and instructed him to immediately rewind the footage while I performed a double-check sweep of every single row. No trace. We watched the playback together. At 6:31 a.m., the camera showed an empty aisle. At 6:31:01, he was simply there. There was no frame showing him walking into the scene, no approach from the side, no sudden dash from around a corner. He just popped into the field of view like someone had pressed a terrifying reset button. That was the precise, defining moment I began to feel genuinely, deeply unnerved. I immediately called Brenda again, asking her to come down and view the footage herself. She waved me off, stating we were far too busy for games, and that maybe I needed to get some strong coffee and stop watching ghost shows. Real supportive stuff. I didn't press the issue. What was I going to say? That a man could teleport in front of a giant row of flat-screen TVs? But then the third manifestation occurred. A little after 8 a.m., I heard a sharp, panicked scream from the deep back quarter of the store. I took off running toward the warehouse section, ducking around a huge, overturned bin of earbuds. I found one of the stockroom clerks, a girl named Chloe, flattened against the wall near the heavy metal cages where we stored our locked-up overstock. She was pointing, shaking violently, barely able to speak. "He was inside, in the cage," she finally managed to gasp. I looked at the cage. The padlock was still securely latched. I had the only physical key. I unlocked it and stepped inside. Nothing but extra floor fans and some dusty, forgotten routers. But on the concrete floor near the far corner was a small, square scrap of black fabric. It looked like a freshly torn piece of a hoodie. When I carefully picked it up, it was warm. Not hot, but not cold either. It felt exactly as if someone had just seconds ago peeled it off their skin. Chloe swore on her life that he had been crouched inside, staring through the heavy metal bars. That was the breaking point. I called the police. They arrived, looked around the premises, but the entire process was frustratingly half-hearted. No signs of forced entry, no immediate physical threat to anyone. They gave me the boilerplate "must have been a mix-up" speech and left without even bothering to file a complete report. The store didn't close, of course not. Brenda was far more concerned with hitting the day's catastrophic sales numbers than with some silent weirdo in a hoodie. After that, I stayed glued to the security monitors. No more patrols. I meticulously scanned the feeds again and again, desperately trying to make sense of the visual evidence. Then, at 10:15 a.m., every single electronic screen in the store, every display TV, every demo tablet, every computer monitor, blinked. Just for one fraction of a second. Static. Loud, sharp, ear-splitting static, like a flashbulb had gone off directly in my ears. And there he was, on every single screen. Just for that single, terrifying blink, he was standing center frame, staring directly out of the camera lens, looking like he was making direct, terrifying eye contact with me. Then everything snapped back to normal programming. I looked around the room. No one else seemed to react or mention it. Either they genuinely didn't see it, or they were simply too exhausted to deal with another unsolvable horror. That was enough for me. I walked straight into the break room, locked the door behind me, and stayed there for the next 2 agonizing hours. I completely ignored the radio, ignored all the incoming texts. I was not going back out on that floor. When my shift was finally over, I left without even bothering to clock out. I checked every shadow, every glass reflection, and every car in the lot as I walked to my vehicle. Nothing followed me. But the next night, just before going to bed, I opened the remote camera app we used to check the after-hours footage, an old, ingrained habit. There was a motion alert flagged at 2:44 a.m. One of the main aisle lights had been tripped. The sensor caught the movement, and there he was, standing in the appliance aisle. Same hoodie, same silent stare, just standing still. I watched the clip twice. Then I immediately deleted the application and the footage, and I have never set foot in that store again.